All right, we should be good to get going. Thanks for joining us for today's webinar, HITRUST 101 Keys to Certification Success. I'm Kevin Cutter. I work as a cybersecurity and compliance advisor for Tevora. I'm joined by Justin Graham. He's Tevora's lead HITRUST assessor, CCSFP and CHQP. Before we get started, just know that we're going to be allowing for questions throughout today's presentation. So if there's anything that comes top of mind, do not hesitate to put that question out there. Justin and I will try to address all of these by the end of today's session. If we don't have enough time, don't worry. We'll make sure that we follow up and get you the answers that you need. And so with that said, I'm going to go ahead and turn you guys over to Justin so we can get started.
Yeah, thanks, Devin. This is Justin Graham. I am a lead assessor here at Tevora. Really excited to be here talking HITRUST with you today. Just real quick, today's agenda, we're going to start with an intro to Tevora and myself, HITRUST overview, why do organizations seek HITRUST certification, how is HITRUST different, the assessment structure, and then finally keys to a successful certification. So just starting off here, Tevora. Tevora is one of the original approved HITRUST CSF assessor firms. And a provider of multiple information security and compliance service offerings. Kevin did a quick intro on me. I'm the lead HITRUST assessor here at Tevora. Jumping right into the first slide here, HITRUST organization overview. So HITRUST was founded in 2007. They are headquartered in Frisco, Texas. And just a fun fact, I'm actually born and raised in the Frisco, Texas area, and that's where I get my wonderful Texas accent from. So moving on, HITRUST, they're the only universally recognized healthcare information security certification. And finally, what I really like, they're governed by a board of directors. They're made up from leaders throughout the healthcare industry. So they have individuals from organizations like Epic, Children's Medical, United Health, Humana. They have a real pulse on the healthcare industry, and I think that's great. Why seek HITRUST CSF certification? I think one of the main trends that we see here at Tevora, the first point here is required by business associates or covered entities. So what we're seeing in the marketplace is that covered entities are requiring any third party that they're doing business with to have a HITRUST certification. So it's really almost becoming a business requirement for a lot of these business associates, such as software providers. The second bullet point, a comprehensive control framework to help better secure your environment. So not all organizations go for certification. We have a lot of organizations out there that simply adopt the HITRUST framework to implement to help better the security of their environment, right? It's a really great framework to align to. And then the last one is really important, a marketplace differentiator for healthcare service and product companies, right? So by putting that HITRUST certification stamp of approval on your technology, it really helps them win over business over their competitors. So it really helps them stand apart. Here's a few HITRUST differences, difference between HITRUST and other frameworks. So first, HITRUST offers a MyCSF tool. It's an online web application that they host, and it's actually used to facilitate self-assessments and the validated assessments. The second box here, which is very unique, so both the assessor and the assessee interact within this tool. So as we are conducting validated assessments, both sides actually have input into that tool, and that's very unique. The third one is very important if you're just starting off your HITRUST journey to understand. So HITRUST has a fee structure that is separate from third-party assessor fees, right? So basically, access to this MyCSF tool has a fee to it. Those are separately on separate papers, so just be aware of that as you're going into your HITRUST journey here. The next box here, I really like. HITRUST audits the auditor on 100% of assessments. So there's no shortcuts, right? So every assessment that is submitted to HITRUST goes under a QA review by HITRUST. It also goes under a compliance review by HITRUST. So there's no rubber stamping of these certifications, right? Every validated assessment that's submitted goes through a review by HITRUST, and I think that's great. The last two boxes, a unique scoring for assessments. Start with there. They look over 5 maturity levels, and we're going to look at that in an upcoming slide. But it's a really good barometer of where you're at in your security posture for your organization. Finally, the control set is unique to each organization. This really is different, right? So at Tevora, our average client will have probably between 275 to 375 controls in scope. And it's unique to every organization because it's based on your risk profile and also whether or not you select certain optional regulatory factors. So that is a unique element or a difference in HITRUST. Moving on here, this is the HITRUST framework organization. So the HITRUST framework is broken down into 19 domains, right? This is from security topics, from access control, risk management, endpoint protection. The framework is broken down into these domains. Each domain has multiple requirements that are individually scored. The next point here, each domain requires a composite score of 62% for certification. This is really important. So certification is at the domain level. So each of these 19 domains has to score at a minimum of 62. That's really important because you can be strategic in where you allow caps or gaps to be in place. HITRUST doesn't make you be perfect. It's not a pass-fail framework like some others, PCI DSS, for example, right? So it's okay to have some deficiencies. You just have to keep it above this minimum level. And by partnering with an experienced assessor firm like Tevora, we can help you navigate that. Each requirement is scored against 5 maturity categories. I'm going to talk about that in just a minute here, and the number of requirements can vary greatly. I kind of went into the average, 275, 375 is an average number. We've seen up to 800 controls in scope. So the number of requirements can vary very greatly by organization. All right, so this is an important slide here. So these are the maturity, different maturity levels. Starting off at the bottom, you'll see the 5 levels: policy, procedure, implemented, measured, and managed. Each control is scored across all 5 of these maturity levels. One thing to note here, I put this slide on here to kind of highlight, it's actually going to be one of the keys in that you have to kind of be on your toes and watch out for updates to the HITRUST assurance program, and that the numbers in the vertical bars are the weights. So HITRUST evolved. You can see for policy, procedure, and implemented, they used to be weighted at 25, 25, and 25, right? Well, the same weight across those 3. HITRUST updated this, and they're putting a much higher emphasis on implementation. So you can see policy dropped to 15, procedure dropped to 20, and then implemented was raised all the way up to 40. So that weight is for the calculation of the score for any given control. So you can see the 5 levels here. You can see how they're weighted, and it's a really clean example of how usually once a year an update can impact you and your HITRUST journey. This next slide, this is the actual.
Justin, if you could you go back with a question that pertained actually to that prior slide?
Absolutely, sure.
Do you know when this update occurred?
Yes, this is a historic update. I want to say this went into play around Q1 2020, but it has been in place for the last year or so.
Perfect, thank you.
Yeah. All right, moving on. This is the CSF scoring rubric. Don't worry too much about the details of this document. It's actually available for download if you go to the HITRUST Alliance website. Reach out to me or Kevin, we can send you a copy as well. But it really shows, you can see across the top, you'll see sections for policy, procedure, implemented, and it has very detailed scoring procedures. And the purpose of this document is to keep scoring consistent, across individual assessors, even across assessor firms. So this document really outlines what those scoring procedures are. All right, and here we are at the, these are the 19 HITRUST domains. If you're, familiar with information security, none of these are really going to be new to you, but it's how the HITRUST framework is divided between these 19. I think it is worth noting, possibly, if I could just highlight a couple of these where our clients typically struggle, I would say maybe configuration management. Maybe we see some lower scores there. Configuration management would be, maintaining baseline configuration for operating systems, some change management controls in there as well. Third-party assurance, we have some clients that typically struggle there. That's just generally speaking, but these are the 19 HITRUST domains here. All right, moving on. This is Tevora's tried and true HITRUST methodology. So it's really a three-phase approach here. It starts off with the gap assessment. The gap assessment, it really is the most critical phase, right? HITRUST isn't a simple framework. And, you want to get a good handle on what your gaps are. So this gap assessment has really become the most critical phase. We put our most experienced assessors on these gap assessments because it is so critical. We move from a gap assessment, the output from the gap assessment, we will deliver a remediation workbook that very detailed, a lot of details in that outline the gaps in the organization. Then it moves into remediation, right? Fixing the gaps. This takes on average our clients 3 to 6 months, really depends on how many gaps, if they have any timelines pushing their HITRUST certification journey. But generally 3 to 6 months of remediation. This is across policy, procedure, and implementation. Before it moves into the validated assessment, which is the actual HITRUST audit, it is worth noting that HITRUST does have a requirement that any control has to be operating for a 90-day period before it can be tested in the validated assessment. So right after remediation, there will be a 90-day holding period, right? And that's basically a period in time where nothing has changed, and it's to meet that HITRUST requirement. All in all, I would say through these three phases, if you want a general time frame, we're looking at on average 9 to 12 months to get through this. Some of our clients might take a year or two to get through the remediation phase, so it varies, but I would say typically 9 to 12 months to get through this. The end of the validated assessment, it's worth noting that that's not just when you get certified. So when you submit your validated assessment to HITRUST, it goes through some administrative procedures, right? I mentioned it goes through a QA process. I mentioned it goes through a compliance review. That could take months. It really just depends on how backed up HITRUST is at that time. But generally, it takes about 2 months after submission for you to get that certification in hand. So. And here we go, keys to a successful certification. Number 1, use an experienced HITRUST CSF assessor. So just know not all assessor firms, let's say, are created equally, right? Being an original assessor firm is an advantage for Tevora, right? We have a dedicated HITRUST team. That is definitely an advantage for Tevora. And, we have a strong relationship with HITRUST. And that's a very distinct advantage for Tevora. So use an experienced assessor firm when you go into this journey. Second point, be aware of HITRUST assurance program updates. HITRUST updates their framework minimally once a year. I think the one slide kind of highlighted that, where they can change things and put really material changes to the process. So make sure you're working with an experienced assessor who has a grasp on all these and can prepare you for those. Third point, get your requirement set established accurately and as soon as possible. So you need to know what you're up against. You need to scope out your assessment. You need to know if you have 294 controls in scope or if you have 321. You need to know what they are so you can start making sure that you have policies and procedures in place for that, and that you have, your technologies implemented. You got to know what you're going up against. Establish accurately is very important as well, right? You need to make sure you're working with someone who is very experienced with scoping these assessments to make sure it's done accurately so there's no surprises at the end of the road. Fourth point, purchase the annual MyCSF subscription, right? There's a cheaper option, but let's just say it could be problematic sometimes. It requires, repurchasing at the interim. I guess you can just say there's a lot of nuances of not having a subscription that really makes it less ideal. Assign requirement owners. Once you get your controls, assign an owner to each of them. Make them own that. Make them responsible for making sure they have a policy in place, a procedure in place, that the controls implemented, according to the HITRUST illustrative procedures. That's very important to ensuring that you're going to be scoring well down the board. Moving on, document all policies and procedures. There's no reason any organization should score less than 100 down the board on policies and procedures, right? It's just documentation. Tevora helps all of our clients. It's part of our gap assessment. We review all policies and procedures and make sure they're up to a level that will support a very high score. Establish a strategy by domain. I kind of talked about this earlier in that you don't have to be perfect with HITRUST, right? You can have caps, you can have gaps. You just have to maintain a minimum domain score to reach certification. The HITRUST CSF has a process built in for entering corrective action plans. Actually, in the cycle of your HITRUST certification, after 1 year, they require an interim assessment. They randomly pick one control out of each of the 19 domains. You retest that to make sure the controls are still operating, and they also check on the status of any corrective action plan to make sure there's movement on those. So it's okay not to be perfect. You just need to have a strategy and make sure that at each domain you're scoring at a high enough level. The Tevora remediation workbook has some functionality to provide these domain scores, and it's a huge help for our clients. Next, keep your requirement set limited to the minimum possible the first year. So this is an organization who's going into HITRUST for the first time, right? There are some regulatory factors that are optional when selected, significantly increase the number of control requirements that are in scope, right? So if you select a GDPR regulatory factor, optional regulatory factor, you could add 50, 100 controls in scope. So the first year through, you want to keep it, limited. You want to make sure your baselines are in place. That's a key point to being successful. Finally, use Tevora. I talked about, a lot of our differentiators. It's definitely, worth pointing out that we have never lost a HITRUST client, and we really hang our hat on that statistic right there. We're a client relationship organization first, right? And really our experience speaks to that. So, we are a very experienced assessor firm, and we deliver success for our clients, plain and simple. Next slide, a little more on that Tevora value proposition. 8 boxes here, the first 2. We provide policy templates, procedure examples, strategic remediation, right? Think, ensuring that we're scoring at the minimal level by domain. We provide an executive summary, right? So you get that 10,000-foot view, right, for management or board members to kind of see the maturity of the security program. We are a solution provider, right? We can do things like implement Splunk. We're really not like other organizations where we're trying to ram this down your throat or anything like that. But we have a solutions team. They're really good, and they can step in and help whenever needed. So that's definitely good. The last three: customer satisfaction, value, relationships, experience. That's just our bread and butter, right? We retain clients. We enjoy working with them, and I think our client success really speaks to that. And that's it. I just want to say, thank you for joining. Again, my name is Justin Graham. My contact information is on this slide. If you would like a copy of these slides, reach out to me, reach out to Kevin. And with that, I wanted to turn it back to Kevin real quick. Kevin, were there any other questions submitted?
Yeah, there were a few. I think we're actually, I think it's worth visiting for a second because there's some pretty good ones. So
awesome.
Number one, what if companies do the gap assessment and remediation themselves?
Yeah, that's definitely an approach. So, the MyCSF tool does have two distinct kinds of assessment: performing a self-assessment, performing a validated assessment. I would say that policy and procedure requirements alone, you really need an experienced assessor firm to walk you through ensuring that you're scoring appropriately. I would say at least 99%, I could almost say 100% of our clients do not maintain policies and procedures at a level that will support a full score. So definitely, absolutely, you could conduct a self-assessment, but you need that expertise. You need an experienced assessor helping you navigate that.
Perfect, great answers. The next one, is there a way to shorten the overall length of the HITRUST process?
There is, on average, I would say it's 9 to 12 months. I've seen it happen in 7. It really depends, how many resources an organization can throw at it. It's a complex process, right, from start to finish. A very mature organization that has a short timeline, yeah, I could see it, 6 to 7 months, but that's probably about as quick as I've ever seen it. And you also have to factor in, once you submit your validated assessment, it's going to take 1 to 2 months to work through HITRUST's QA processes. So that's just kind of adding on to that timeline before you get that certification in hand.
Yeah, and there's one other great question that came, and there's 2 more actually that are very strong. But the first one, I've even run into this with some of my HITRUST clients. They've asked this question of me, particularly with pain points kind of around dealing with the HITRUST Alliance at calendar year end. So the question is, given the nature of HITRUST certification and its multi-phase approach, is there a good time of year to start HITRUST for my organization?
Yeah, that's a good question. And, I've got some inside baseball on that. Just know, especially with the last answer, we talked about how long it takes to get an assessment through the HITRUST QA process. Q4 is their busiest time of year. So that 2 months, that could be 3 or 4 months, right? So if you submit an assessment in November or December, you might have a longer waiting period before you actually get your certification in hand. If I had to come up with the ideal time in any given year to go through HITRUST, I would schedule it so that Q4 is your holding period. So gap assessment, remediation, go into Q4 with your holding period where for 90 days you don't have to do anything, and kick off your validated assessment in Q1. I think if I could write it up to be as easy as possible, that's where I'd be.
Excellent. And then, yeah, the elephant in the room, because we've had a few folks ask about this kind of one-on-one, but I've heard that version 10 for HITRUST is coming soon, and it's one of the most significant updates that HITRUST has ever put forward. Can you provide any insight into what to expect?
Yes, I wish I could provide more insight, but what Tevora is watching this very closely. Version 10 will come out this year. You can guarantee that. What I know about version 10, it is going to be a preview version released in mid-May. We're talking weeks, right? That preview version is going to be available through the MyCSF tool until November. And during this preview period, they have open comments on it, and it really gives everybody a first look at version 10. It will be the most significant update in the history of HITRUST. They're making a lot of, what I've gathered, a lot of updates to their tool, how the functionality works in the tool. I believe, and again, we haven't seen the actual framework yet, but we have some insight that they're probably going to be changing kind of the structure of how the 19 domains land. So stay tuned for that. I would say that this is something that is very high on our radar, right? And expect more communications from Tevora on this. Expect future webinars on this topic because it's really going to be a major update in the HITRUST pool.
Perfect. Yeah, so that was it as far as questions, but I'm glad that you have this screen up. Hopefully, the attendees have taken a second to kind of look at this. Some of you may have even seen this before on past webinars, but everyone out there has PowerPoint fatigue. We've all, for the most part, been trapped at home for the better portion of a year. But these are our 7 dedicated practices at Tevora. We just consolidated it into one slide for everyone to have. This will be included in the deck that we reach out with. So those attendees that are on, your respective Tevora rep is going to follow up within the next day or two with a recording from today's session, as well as the actual deck from the presentation from Justin. So you guys have that on file. But the great thing about HITRUST, those gap assessments and reports can lead to discovery of things throughout your environment. And in a lot of cases, these are areas where Tevora does shine. Justin kind of already referenced our security solutions practice in the lower right-hand corner. Those of you that are migrating into cloud or in a hybrid environment, we have an excellent dedicated cloud practice that's gotten a lot of great results over the last few years. And then enterprise risk management, that's our bread and butter, started there, along with compliance way back in 2003 when we started this management consultancy. And then shortly after, you have pen testing, incident response, which unfortunately has been very popular out there right now. A lot of ransomware attacks, a lot of craziness out there in people's environments. So if you see anything like this kind of coming up across the board that jumps out at you here, just work with your rep. We can plug you back in with Justin or any of the respective practice leads, managing directors at Tevora to make sure that you're in good hands. And we also have upcoming webinars. We have a pretty busy schedule, I believe, over the next month or two. Justin, did you have anything on that? Perfect. So these are some of the additional webinars that we have coming up. So again, when your rep reaches out, we have one on PCI that's next week. Risk assessment models, that's on the 25th, end of May. And then going into June, we have 2 more on incident response in the cloud, and then identity access management, and lastly, hardware hacking. And these are all going to give you exposure to different thought leaders within Tevora, their practices, what they're working on the bleeding edge. So if this is of interest, just let your respective rep know. They can provide all the registration detail for that, or plug you in for a 30-minute hour session with those same individuals if you just want to kind of pick their brain and get to know us a bit better. But that's everything for me. Justin, do you have anything else before we wrapped up? Or
No, Kevin, I think I'm good. Thank you.
Okay, well, excellent. Thank you guys so much. We can give you some time back in your day. Everyone have a great rest of your week and weekend.